Welcome, welcome, welcome. Hey folks, my name is Jake Williams. I am the Executive Director of Cyber Threat Intelligence at SCYTHE. What you may not know is I'm also on faculty at the Institute for Applied Network Security, and I do various roles or perform various roles with SANS, including being on the editorial board for News Bites, a twice weekly email covering some cybersecurity news or some of the top cybersecurity news. Today in News Bites, we actually had a reference at SANS about a proposed change to rules regarding notification or breach disclosure for publicly traded companies that's been proposed by the SEC. It's also something that keeps coming up as I talk to folks in ION circles. And so I figured I would go ahead and address it here since I have some background, just a little bit, in incident response. Even though that's not what I do specifically at SCYTHE, it's still worth covering because I suspect that a lot of you are dealing with this and thinking about this overall, as you are reacting to or being asked about, these proposed rule changes by the SEC. Basically, the SEC is saying now that if you have what they determine to be a material cybersecurity incident and you are a publicly traded company, then you are required to amend your Form 8K within 48 hours of discovering what they call a significant cybersecurity or material cybersecurity incident. Basically, something that would impact the share price if it were known publicly, right? That's kind of the bar. Or, and by the way, this is not investment advice, it's not legal advice, it's not any of that because I am not qualified to offer, well, any of that, right? But I do want to quickly talk about why people are up in arms about this, why this is making the rounds from a news standpoint. For one, it's 48 hours, and that's not a lot of time. Now, I am really happy about the way the SEC actually, or what they specifically require within that 48 hours. You'll note here that I have the PDF for the proposed rule, up here. You'll also notice it's 129 pages, right? And we are not going through that. We are merely looking at specifically what's required because the argument that's being posed here is not that this is too onerous, but I'm hearing a lot of folks say, if we have to report this, that's going to create problems for us. We're giving up too much for a threat actor. In 48 hours, we won't even have him out of the network. Well, first off, I agree there. In 48 hours, you probably don't have the threat actor out of the network. But I do want to challenge the idea that reporting the specific information required by the SEC, right? This specific information, I do want to challenge the idea that somehow that's providing the threat actor some additional data and some advantage that they didn't already have. First off, let's start and just go line by line here. When was the incident discovered and is it ongoing? Your threat actor doesn't care about this. I mean, first off, they generally know. They've got a pretty good idea. Take it from someone who sat on both sides of the keyboard, right? And so I can tell you that your threat actor is not at all surprised about your is not at all surprised about the fact that you've begun an incident response. If you don't already have them out of your network, they definitely have seen changes in the way that you're operating. I don't care how good your OPSEC is. I don't care if you call it on a third-party team. The reality is that before that third-party team with great OPSEC comes in, the vast majority of organizations have already tipped their hand to the threat actor. So done there. Brief description and nature of the scope of the incident, right? Now, look, I can see where this would be problematic potentially for some organizations, but let me talk briefly about that, right? Because realistically, in most cases here, I think that folks here would like to really downplay an incident. This is where I think the SEC's proposed rule really benefits the public here, right? Because today we have a lot of what I could call wishful thinking in our breach notifications and breach disclosures. Maybe creative fiction is a good way to say it, right? I've been involved in a non-zero number of incidents where what is communicated to the public versus what is reality are completely divorced from one another, right? And so here, we now, obviously with any publicly traded company, that tends to not be the case. It tends to be the case that, the disclosure is generally pretty in line with reality. But here, remember, in the first 48 hours, right, they're going to have to go ahead and explain that. By the way, if you're curious, like, why is it generally closer to the truth when we're talking about a publicly traded company? That's because, you're literally signing on the dotted line here for your 8K. And of course, you are, if you make materially false statements, there's criminal charges that go with that. It's not just, PR, right? Or bad public relations, right? Okay, what about was any data stolen, altered, accessed, or used for an unauthorized purpose, right? This may explain to the threat actor where you're at. Likewise, with the scope of the incident, right? If a threat actor is still in the network and you report a very, very small piece of the overall incident, they could possibly infer that you have not completely identified all the places that they have compromised. That's a possibility. But I have to kind of come back here and say I don't think it's a large possibility. This isn't a problem we've traditionally seen, where I would expect a threat actor to turn around and go, oh, well, they haven't discovered us in this one place, even though they've kicked us out of the rest of the network. Threat actors are already changing their tooling, and generally doing some counter forensics to the extent that they care at all. But doing some counter forensics in your network there. Looking to remove, basically any signatures or evidence of, based on signatures that you've already discovered, right? So again, I just don't see this as being, being something that's going to really tip our hand to the threat actor and give them an advantage that they wouldn't have otherwise. The effect of the incident on the registrant's operations, right? Well, this, of course, being the registrant being the company. Now, this could be significant, right? I do want to throw out here that in the case of a ransomware event, right, you explaining the effect. Now, remember, again, the goal here, when we talk about effect, we're not talking about it's 1,000 servers, right? Forget about that, right? We're talking about what does the SEC care about, right? This is investor relations, right? So how material would this be ultimately to our investors or shareholders? And in a ransomware case or an extortion case, I could see this possibly giving some benefit to the threat actor. I think on balance, however, the benefit is probably larger to the shareholders than it is to the threat actor. But I do want to explain what I mean here. If you are negotiating with a threat actor and they know that basically their ransomware or their ransomware has crippled your operations, or they've stolen data and that would be expected to have, cause a $100 million loss or whatever that is the effect, right, on the operations. And you disclose that, let's say it's a $100 million extortion or damage through the extorted data if it were released would be, let's say that the company says $100 million. Well, the threat actor obviously now is going to use that as an anchor in their negotiations. I get that. I think the SEC is going to be smart about those specific areas, and I think you could be vague enough in there that you wouldn't really need that. But I understand people are holding that kind of thing out as a straw man. In ransomware, let's be real. The threat actor already has a really good idea of how much they're impacting you, and ultimately here in 48 hours, you have probably entered that negotiation phase and are either well on the way towards towards paying, or you're not, right? And I don't think this meaningfully changes the dynamic of what a threat actor is going to demand, and also probably worth mentioning that, by and large, when we see the big scale ransomware operations, it's largely, I don't want to say largely not publicly traded companies, but they tend, there's a bias towards small medium enterprises versus these larger publicly traded companies. Then finally, this one I think is probably the one that is going to give folks the most heartache, right? Has the registrant remediated, or are they currently remediating the incident? Look, in 48 hours after detection, you are probably still remediating. But a lot of folks would love to say the word remediated, right? It's done. It's in the past. It's in the rearview mirror, and we are moving on with our lives. And if you say that, and the threat actor is still in the network, I'd be really worried about that too, right? I'd be worried about what they would do next. I'm thinking about lapsus, definitely, right? And some other cases where, folks have blasted out on social media / announced elsewhere that, no, we are definitely still in the network, right? And so I guess kind of circling all the way back around here, I see some definite, second order effects of these filings, but I don't generally look at this from a perspective of, basically from a perspective of, hey, this is definitely going to give lots of data back to the threat actors. It's going to give an asymmetric advantage to our threat actors. What I do see it giving, to the extent that it gives our threat actors any information that's usable, right? I think that it gives investors substantially more usable information. So I understand where the concern's at here, but I think the concern is largely misplaced. For the organizations arguing about this, I'm not sure whether they're arguing in bad faith or they just don't understand how incident response really works, right? If my experience with incident response were purely from watching NCIS, with the Two Idiots, One Keyboard video. By the way, if you haven't seen that, go look it up. Or CSI Cyber, right, where they go find the red code, right? I totally would probably look at this and be like, oh my gosh, totally damaging, right? The reality is the SEC has brought in a lot of experts that have helped them draft these recommendations. And it shows through in what specifically they're requiring. They could say any indicators known. Well, look, obviously that would give actual, dare I use the words aid and comfort, right, to our threat actors, right? They would be able to see that and directly react there, right? And also that doesn't provide anything really for our investors, right? I say our investors generally, who are supposed to be the beneficiaries of this, of this new regulation. So. I guess I'll close it out here by mentioning that the 48-hour piece is concerning. I saw something for some Indian companies, I believe, is on the order of now hours that they have to report on. 48, like 4, right? The thing that we can say for sure is that our breach notification timelines are coming down dramatically. Just dramatically, right? And that's going to continue to occur. Obviously, this 48-hour proposed rule change is for publicly traded companies, but with a number of data breach privacy laws and data breach reporting laws, coming in around the 50 states, as well as the European Union and internationally, I don't think that it's too wild of a prediction to say that we are likely to see these numbers go down. And so, what then is our action that we're going to take away from this, right? Well, it's got to be, for me, one of the big ones is purple teaming, right? I know some of you are going to be like, no, not purple teaming, Jake, incident response. Got it, right? The incident response is something you're going to do no matter what, right? Because you're going to call your cyber insurer, to the extent you have one, and they are going to assign you a breach coach, and you are going to call an incident response firm that's on the insurer's panel. And heck, if you're not insured, great. Then you're going to Google somebody, you're going to call in an incident response provider. They're going to come in and they're going to do the response. But, and this is critical, they're going to be playing the hand they're dealt over ridiculous numbers of incident responses over the years. I have never shown up at an incident and said, wow, what am I going to do with all these logs? I have never, ever had an incident where I've shown up and all the telemetry that I needed to investigate that incident was present. It's just never happened. This is where purple teaming comes in. Purple teaming is a lot about our detections, right? What types of activities can we detect? When we do purple teaming exercises, sometimes we identify data that we can alert with. Sometimes we identify stuff that simply is logged. It's telemetry that gets logged, and we at least have that historical record of a particular activity taken by a threat actor. But in the general order of things, right, we wouldn't necessarily be going through all those logs because, again, it's something that I can't separate necessarily on an average basis benign from malicious activity, right? Something like copying a file, right? Well, when the threat actor does it, that's bad. That's staging for exfiltration. When a normal person does it, it's just normal. It's part of what we do every day as part of our business operations. This is where purple teaming comes in because you're going to run a lot of what-if scenarios. And I expect as we come through and see more rapid requirements or more requirements for rapid data breach notification, purple teaming, especially around the what data will I have available to investigate the incident. Not guessing, right? Not guessing, knowing is going to become that much more critical. I totally expect to see more of this coming down the pike. Man, not a moment too soon, because the best incident responders in the world, right? They can't work with the data you don't have. And this is where, whether you call it incident response gap assessment, where you simply look and say, what data would we like to have available? Or whether you run the more methodical purple team, where you actually validate that you have that data available. Again, folks, the time to start is now. I can just about bet that this is going to go through, give or take, as written. If you're a publicly traded company and you don't know that you're going to be able to answer some of these questions here and have the data available to be confident in your answers 48 hours in. Again, remember that, 48 hours into detection, the time to start looking for gap assessment and purple teaming is now. With that, folks, I'm going to call it a day. Have a great day. Enjoy. Peace out.